Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 350. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Friday, February the 16th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. On my Spreaker profile, and for the longest time, well, probably since I've ever been running my pie hole on the radio or on the podcast or wherever, Saturday mornings has been the time for a podcast. And if you're a regular listener to the show, you'll see that, you know what, I haven't done many podcasts on Saturday mornings. It's been Sunday morning. It's been Sunday afternoon. It's been Thursday afternoon. This is a Friday morning, okay? So different times I'm doing different podcasts. It doesn't seem like it's Saturday anymore. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? No, it's just a thing. I guess that's the advantage for me anyway to doing a podcast. As you all know, I call podcast radio because radio I don't believe is necessarily the appliance you set on the counter. It's the medium. It's audio, okay? So this is radio. But I can do this whenever I want, and you can listen to it whenever you want. I mean, once upon a time, the disadvantage to radio is if you want to listen to James Strong, you had to turn into 12:20 a.m. From, what was it, 11 o'clock to 1 in the afternoon, something like that? Yeah, 11 to 1 on Saturdays. If you didn't listen then, you were out of luck. Now, I don't have to be in the studio at a set time, and you don't have to turn the radio to the dial at a set time. I do this when I can, and you listen when you can. Now, are there disadvantages? Yeah, maybe. I guess there's no more call-ins. I mean, I've done call-ins. Remember, I did a couple of those. I might do those again. I do have the technology to do a call-in podcast. I've done them before. It's been, years since I've done one. But the disadvantage is you have to know when I'm going to do it, okay? And I could send emails out to everybody. I could let people know. I could do all that kind of stuff. But then people's schedules are such that, well, let's just put that on the back burner for now. I've done it in the past. I'll probably do it in the future. I'm not doing it anytime soon. How's that? So here we are on a Friday morning, very early on a Friday morning, 6:44 in the morning right now. I got up early to do this podcast. Just to get it done because there was a lot I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to go ahead and put this out before Sunday, before the weekend. If I have gotten one complaint from you, dear listeners, it's just that, you know what, I'm used to tuning in on a Saturday morning and having the podcast there. If I'm doing it on Sundays and you tune in on Saturday, you can get one that's 6 days old, and maybe it's lost a little bit of its oomph because this is kind of a semi-news of the day type of podcast. So anyway, that's a little bit of a backstory as to why I'm here this morning on a Friday morning instead of a Sunday morning or a Saturday morning. Okay. And it's a 350th podcast that I've done. That's something. What that means is if I'm doing one a week, and it's not one a week, it's more like, I don't know, 40 to 45 a year. Let's say 40 a year, okay? 45 a year, 40 to 45 a year. So that's quick. That's 7 years since I've been on the radio, 6 years. That's a lot. That's a lot. So it's been a long time since I've been on that medium, but I'm here on the podcast, number 350, somewhat of a milestone, okay? It's a lot of podcasts. I'm glad to be doing them. And I'm grateful to you, dear listeners, for listening in on the podcast. The topic of today's essay, the Ginsu bomb and the billionaire. What? What's he talking about now? Two stories that I stumbled upon this week. I do read a lot, and I stumble upon these stories that you've probably never heard of, but I find very interesting, so I like to put them out there. And two particular stories, the ones I'm going to talk about today, there's a new bomb out there that's been used by the U.S. government called the Ginsu bomb. That's the nickname, of course. We'll talk about that, what it is, where they've used it, and how effective it is. And a guy who's going to be one of the richest men in the world and not really happy about it. We'll talk about that as well. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl. I know that was, 5 days ago? I'm not a huge football fan. I don't dislike football, but I almost always watch the Super Bowl, okay? And normally we watch it with friends or family at a Super Bowl party, at maybe sometimes at our house, sometimes elsewhere. This time was at my youngest son's house with some family there and the kids. It was fun. And normally what I'll do is I'll watch the game until it becomes not a real good game. This time, sorry if you're a 49ers fan, but good for you if you're a Chiefs fan, because the Chiefs won in overtime. And I will say that it was if not the best Super Bowl ever as far as excitement goes, it was one of the best. It was a fantastic game. It was nail-biting. It was intriguing. It was fun to watch. It was a fantastic football game. If you're a football fan, you had to love it. If you're a 49ers fan, you had to hate it only because your team had the game in the bag and blew it because your guy missed the extra point, but that's another story for another day, and that's just how sports works, okay? But it was a good game, exciting. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Two things I wanted to talk about with the game, though, that have absolutely nothing to do with the game. But it has to do with the halftime show and a certain girlfriend of a certain tight end from one of the teams, okay? First, let's start off with the girlfriend, Taylor Swift. People are losing their mind over showing this girl on television, okay? Now, here's what you need to know. And first of all, if you're losing your mind over this, I don't know what's wrong with you. I saw a meme on Facebook that was hilarious, and it was it went something like this. I'm going to paraphrase, but basically it was Taylor Swift saw her boyfriend on television this weekend, which means we're going to have 6 more weeks of right-wing conspiracy theories. Kind of a play on the whole groundhog thing, which I thought was hilarious. People are losing their mind. This is the NFL. You got to show that stupid girl on television. Let me give you a statistic. That game was over 3 hours old, close to 4 hours old. Do you know how much time Taylor Swift was on the television tube? 54 seconds. Less than a minute. So stop losing your mind over it. They didn't concentrate on her. They flashed to her every now and then. Okay? It's not a big deal. She is the biggest pop star out there. Now, do I like her music? I'm not going to even say I dislike her music because I don't know her music. I'm an old man. She doesn't cater to people like me. I will tell you that young people like her a lot, especially women. But that's who she caters to. That's her crowd, okay? That's her crowd. And if you're losing your mind because they showed one of the best players on the field's girlfriend, who happens to be the most popular pop star in the world, for 54 seconds during a close to 4-hour game, friend, you have a problem. I would consider calling you a snowflake if that really bothers you. Part 2, the halftime show, Usher. I saw so many people on social media, and these are mainly older right-wing people, kind of like me, who are just damning the halftime show. Now, I will tell you, I know next to nothing about Usher, but Usher is in the same category as Taylor Swift. Not because they have the same type of music or play the same type of music, but they cater to a crowd who does not include me. I'm not their crowd, okay? But if I'm looking at the show, I mean, he hit all his notes. He hit all his dance steps. There was flashy music and guitar playing and dancing and roller skating. It seemed like a regular halftime show. I had never heard of any of the songs except for the last one. And the only reason I've heard the last song, I couldn't even tell you what the name of it was, but because they play it on bumper music for radio talk shows and in commercials. That's why I've heard it, because not that I've heard the music on the radio, but radio talk show hosts play it as bumper music. That's what I know about Usher. But again, if you're damning his halftime show because you don't like Usher's music, you're a snowflake, because it's not that his show was bad. It's just that wasn't your type of music. Now, if you say, you know what, that halftime show wasn't for me because that's not my genre of music, that's fine. But don't mock, ridicule, and make fun of the guy whose music isn't your forte. Because the music that I like, okay, first of all, the musicians that I enjoy listening to are either dead, retired, or probably should be dead, or should have probably already retired, okay? They're not going to be on the halftime show. You really want the octogenarians on the Rolling Stone on the halftime show? Come on. Think about it. The halftime show was fine. If you don't like the music of the guy, or if the music of the guy who was on the halftime show isn't your cup of tea, that's okay. He's not catering to you as an audience. He's catering to somebody else. And what you need to understand is the whole world doesn't wrap around you. Now, I've used the term right wing a couple of times. I consider myself a conservative capitalist. I've always considered myself a conservative capitalist. I think I will always consider myself a conservative capitalist. Hating on musicians who play music that you're not into, that has nothing to do with conservatism and has nothing to do with capitalism. It just has to do with being short-sighted. Okay, into the essay, the Ginsu bomb and the billionaire. Two separate stories that have nothing to do with anything. Not to let's send a Ginsu bomb to kill a billionaire, because it's not that. It's two separate stories. The first one has to do with a relatively new weapon that the Pentagon has put into action, called, actually the nickname is called the Flying Ginsu, okay? And you think to yourself, what on earth could a bomb called the Flying Ginsu possibly be? Well, they used it recently. In fact, they've used it several times. Most recently, they used it when they killed that Khatib Hezbollah leader in downtown Baghdad last week. Okay, remember when that happened? The guy's name was Abu Bakr al-Sadi, okay? And he was a big Hezbollah leader. But they used this Flying Ginsu last week to kill him. What is a Flying Ginsu? It's a bomb. In fact, it's a modified Hellfire missile, but it doesn't have a warhead. What happens is this Hellfire missile, basically, the way it works is it goes into its target, pierces the target, and then upon impact, 6 telescoping knives shoot out of the side of it and just kill anything that's around. It skewers them like a shish kebab, okay? But it doesn't blow up. Bottom line is there's no collateral damage. None at all, because it killed them with a knife, okay? And they call it the Flying Ginsu, because remember the Ginsu knives they used to sell in the infomercials back in the 1970s? Yeah, they kind of borrowed that name. They call it the Flying Ginsu. And how did it work this time? Well, the strike on Bakr al-Sadi, he was traveling in a car, and this was part of a retaliatory response to the Iranian-backed group for their role in the attacks on the U.S. troops in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. In fact, remember back on, January 28th, there was an attack on a base that killed 3 American soldiers and injured a whole lot more. Now, the weapon is formally known as the R9X, and it's a modified Hellfire missile designed by the Pentagon and the CIA. Okay, so if the Pentagon and the CIA have designed this, it's effective, okay? And it's designed to kill terrorists. And it was employed in part because of concerns of killing innocent bystanders. And they don't want to kill innocent bystanders. They just want to kill the bad actors. Now, imagery of the strike on El Sadi showed the remnants of a burning but largely intact vehicle. And it was reminiscent of others involving the Ginsu, the flying Ginsu bomb. It's a weapon with an exploding warhead, but actually they take the warhead off, because if a bomb with a warhead hit the car, it'd blow the car up and cause a lot of collateral damage. Again, this car, it was on fire, but it was intact because there was no bomb, okay? Now, the U.S. military declines to comment on the use of the flying Ginsu, but the flying Ginsu, it's also called the ninja bomb, is designed to plunge more than 100 pounds of metal through tops of cars and buildings to kill its target without harming individuals or property close by. Now, instead of exploding, it has 6 telescoping knives that eject out of its nose at the moment of impact. Now, it's unclear how many times the Pentagon has used this weapon, but typically it's employed against high-profile individuals where areas where targeting people risk killing innocent bystanders. Some U.S. defense officials say they believe El Sadi may have been in a crowded part of the Iraqi capital because he thought he was safer among so many civilians. And that's kind of how these terrorists act, okay? They hide themselves in kindergartens and mosques and hospitals and around a bunch of people. Then when they get killed, look at this, you killed all these people. Well, the only one who got killed this time was El Sadi and his henchmen. No innocent bystanders were killed. In fact, the U.S. used this weapon in the targeting of an al-Qaeda leader named Ayman al-Zawahiri back in July of 2022, and it was a strike on Islamic State in Afghanistan. So they've used it before. They also used it to kill a guy named Jamal al-Bawadi. That was the guy who planned to use the strike against the USS Cole back in 2000, okay? So many times they've used this, but it's just now kind of coming to fruition as to what this bomb is and what it's all about. So the flying Ginsu, the new bomb put out by the CIA and the Pentagon. Now, Washington and Baghdad last month began formal talks aimed at winding down the coalition between Washington and Baghdad, but there's no time frame. Because if you remember, Baghdad was just irate. Oh, how dare you do something like this on our land? Well, this is an Iranian terrorist operating in the middle of the downtown of your capital, okay? You hate the Iranians as much as we do, but you're going to let this happen? Now he's dead. Everybody's happy. When I say everybody, I'm talking about everybody on the right side. The Iranians aren't happy about it. That's their guy. But the West is happy. Iraq is happy. And if Iraq really was that upset, they'd do like Afghanistan did and tell us to get out. They're not going to get us to get out because they want us there, because if we're not there, Iraq turns into Afghanistan, okay? So the flying Ginsu, the Ginsu bomb, the ninja bomb, the new weapon that kills without collateral damage. I found that just amazing. And that's where warfare has changed, okay? If you think to yourself, well, Strong, what are you doing just glamorizing death? I'm not glamorizing death, but I'll say it again. I'll say it 100 more times before I stop running my pie hole on the radio. A lot of what we do in the United States is not good. It's ugly. It kills people. It harms people. But ever since there has been a mankind, somebody has been in charge. Since there have been people, somebody has been in charge, because that's the way people work. Somebody's going to be king of the castle. Somebody's going to be in charge. And if you look at how we do things, because let's face it, who runs NATO? It's the United States. Okay. In fact, even that bill that just went through the Senate to give aid to Ukraine, it's for $60 billion. That's more than the EU is going to give. So the United States is going to give more military aid to Ukraine than all the European countries combined, okay? And think about it. If Russia is successful in taking over Ukraine, somebody's going to be next. And it's probably going to be a NATO country. So they have a real interest. I mean, their country may not exist anymore if Russia decides to continue to advance. Russia is never going to invade the United States. That's never going to happen. There's a real chance that Russia can invade Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, all these countries that are right on the border. There's a real chance they can invade that if they take over Ukraine. So Europe has a vested interest in making sure Russia isn't successful. And they still don't give enough money, as much money as we do. Bottom line is, we are the king of the castle. And if you're going to damn the U.S. for being the king of the castle, here's something you need to consider. Somebody's going to be in charge. It's not going to be the EU. If it's not the United States, it's going to be Russia or China or that new axis of evil that is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Now, would you rather them run the world? Would you rather them be the king of the castle? Would you rather be them who dictate what everybody's going to do? So before you criticize it, think about it. Number 2 story. The title of this essay is The Ginsu Bomb of the Billionaire. Let's talk about the billionaire, okay? It's a billionaire you've never heard of, an interesting guy. And I read this story and it intrigued me. I'm always intrigued with self-made men or women. This guy's name is Autry Stevens. Have you ever heard of him? Well, I hadn't either. But he's one of the last Texas wildcatters, okay? And he's about to become one of the richest men in the world. And he may or may not be happy about it, okay? Now, on Monday of this week, 4 days ago, he announced that he would sell his company, which is called Endeavor Energy Resources. It was a company that sprang from a well that Stevens drilled 45 years ago. Yeah, 45 years ago, he took all the money he had in the world and sunk an oil well. And it was successful, and he kept doing it. And it was more successful. He founded Endeavor Energy Resources. Actually, he founded that company when he was in his 60s already, okay? And it's now a $26 billion cash and stock deal. In fact, because he sold the company. Most of the proceeds will go to him and his family. Yet, again, the guy's going to be worth $26 billion, an additional $26 billion. But he's not particularly happy about it. Audrey Stevens says, there's certainly some sadness on my part, he said in an interview. You think to yourself, well, how can you be sad if you're selling your company for $26 billion with a B? Well, Stevens held out for years in selling Endeavor. Endeavor's long viewed as one of the gems of the prolific Permian Basin in West Texas and New Mexico, turning down oil behemoths including ExxonMobil. In fact, Stevens loved running the tightly knit company where many of his employees spent their whole careers. I'll miss the people there, he said of Endeavor. It was kind of like a little family. In fact, in the end, the 85-year-old billionaire decided to cash out because he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, okay? The treatment left Stevens physically diminished and ready to sell. And that was a big factor in my decision, he said. In fact, this concludes a 62-year career for Stevens that spans the rise of OPEC, the feared decline of U.S. crude production, and the unexpected resurgence of the shale boom. Because you remember, back in the 70s, when OPEC was started and they thought, we're done with oil. There's no more oil. We're going to run out. We're going to depend on the Arabs. Well, guess what? You know who pumps more oil than anybody in the world? The United States. We pump more oil than Saudi Arabia. We pump more oil than anyone. 50 years ago, we were running out of oil. Today, we pump more than anybody else, okay? So, what's the old saying? I'm going to screw this up, but I'm going to do it. It's early, folks. something about the rumors of my death are exaggerated because, yeah, there's plenty of oil around there, and we're pumping it right now. In fact, Stevens, he's joining the ranks of private oil companies that are cashing in on shale riches. A company called Crown Rock, led by Timothy Dunn, he did it. He sold out to Occidental Petroleum 2 months ago for $11 billion. So these guys are all cashing out. In fact, the frenzy of deals has reshaped the oil patch, consolidating the scrappy drillers who set the oil shale boom among the larger guys. And the larger guys are buying out the little guys, okay? Endeavor is one of the last giant privately held drillers. It has the largest remaining inventory of top-tier oil acreage of any private Permian company, okay? They have just more than anybody else. They're pumping 200,000 barrels of oil a day. 200,000 a day, this one company. The merger with Diamondback would create a juggernaut that will compete with the likes of ConocoPhillips and Exxon in the Permian. So Diamondback is buying them. And by buying this little guy, in fact, he's not little, by buying this independent company, Diamondback is now as big as ConocoPhillips and Exxon in the Permian Basin, which is where much of our oil comes from. Stevens and his family own almost all of Endeavor, and they're expected to receive virtually all of the fruits of the sale, which includes $8 billion in cash and the rest of it in stocks. Okay, Stevens already is worth $15 billion. So what's 15 plus 26? $41 billion he's going to be worth now. Okay, $41 billion. That's a lot of dough, man. In fact, Stevens is little known outside the oil patch. I had never heard of him. And while his fortunes dwarf those accumulated by like T. Boone Pickens and those types of guys, it's still a lot. But he's not a big money guy, okay? He doesn't have a private plane. He travels on Southwest Airlines, okay? His vehicle is an old Toyota Land Cruiser. He comes into his office every day, okay? For years, he didn't take any distribution. Translation, paycheck. And he only recently started taking cash out of the company. That's according to people who are familiar with the matter. I'm always looking for another deal, said Stevens. And he just basically lived very modestly, even though he had tons of money. But about a year ago, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. His daughter, Lynn, sits on Endeavor's board. And in fact, actually, he thought about putting Lynn in charge of the company. But he thought it would be too much of a burden because she's raising her kids. And she agreed. She said, look, Pop, I'd love to run the company, but I got family to take care of. He has a son also, but the son's really not interested in the family business. He has other interests. So there's no family to run it. So he thought he would sell. Okay. His daughter, Lyndall Greth, who's kind of running the company now, she said her priority is focused on her young children. And it's been an honor to work for Dad, but I want to raise my kids. I don't want to run an oil company. His ambition, Ms. Greth talking about her father, his ambition, value system, and integrity is unmatched. So she has tons of respect for her dad, but she'd rather raise her kids. And think about that as a person. She's got to be good, like her dad, okay? Now, there's few Permian Basin companies, that are as coveted as Endeavor. In fact, 6 months ago, Exxon approached Endeavor to discuss a potential sale, Stevens said. But they never found a point to where they could agree. The conversations just didn't pan out. They just didn't, okay? Now, Endeavor started a sales process back in December with Diamondback. ConocoPhillips was also a bidder, but Endeavor had more cultural affiliates with Diamondback. He just liked the company better. Diamondback's office is down the street from Endeavor's. They're neighbors. He liked them. And both companies operate in the Midland Permian Basin, same area, same people, same geographical area. So he knew the company. He was more comfortable with it. Now, Stevens goes on to say that most of my employees will have a good job with Diamondback. So I'd say that would be the number one factor. So that was a big factor in it. He wanted to make sure the new owners would take care of his people. He said that building a good company was one of his proudest achievements. Creating jobs and trying my darndest to make those jobs permanent for those people was most important to me. Now, what is his background? Well, Autry Stevens, he grew up in a small farming community of De Leon. That's a small city in central Texas. His father only reached the 4th grade. And he had a dealership selling Massey Ferguson tractors, okay? So a farmer that also sold tractors. That was his dad. But Stevens went to school. He graduated from the University of Texas at Austin as a petroleum engineer and thought he'd travel to exotic locales like Venezuela. He said, but I just couldn't see myself sitting behind a desk. So instead, he joined a company called Humble Oil. Now, ever hear of Humble Oil? No, neither have I. But they grew and grew and grew and collected more companies and more companies, and they're now called ExxonMobil. Okay, so yeah, you've heard of them indirectly. Because remember, this guy started off a long time ago. He took a 2-year break to join the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, serving as a lieutenant and a platoon leader responsible for fuel installations. He then worked as a reservoir engineer at a Midland bank. He drilled his first well, didn't drill his first well till 1979. He was 41 years old before he drilled his first well in Midland County, throwing his life savings into the venture. That was a move, he said, that really wasn't very smart, but it panned out. Back in 1996, Stevens founded the Big Dog Drilling Company. Now, despite its aspirational name, the company started with just one small rig. He started Endeavor in 2000, okay? So he was 61 years old when he started this company. He placed all his personal assets in the new company. So you're 61 years old, and you take all the chips and you say, I'm all in on this big risk company, okay? 5 years later, he acquired the U.S. assets of a French company called Penerco, and that allowed Endeavor to grow its oil and gas production by 25%. Stevens rode the booms and the busts in the business, and his company came close to the edge of bankruptcy in both 2008 during the crisis and 2014. That's when crude prices tumbled. So as early as 10 years ago, he almost lost everything, but he kept on going. Now, starting in 2016, Endeavor refocused on drilling horizontal wells. That's the technique that combined with fracking, unleashed gushers of oil from the once sleepy Permian Basin. And things took off from there. So things didn't take off until 8 years ago. That's when he was 77 years old. That's when things started taking off for this guy, okay? At 77, he really started making all his good money, okay? Now, in Midland, Stevens' hard work ethic became local folklore. But for the hiatuses that he would spend, like fishing, he liked to fish in Alaska and on the Gulf Coast. He's still hard at work. In fact, at age 74, when most oilmen retire, he was still picking how Endeavor's wells should be perforated. In fact, this is his brainstorm. This is his company. When Chuck Malloy, that's Endeavor's chief executive between 2016 and 2020, when he walked down the hall of the founder's office, he'd have to clear a chair full of land maps and geological maps before he could take a seat. Malloy said, I felt like it was his way of telling me where his head was without even saying a word. Now, the merger with Endeavor is a coup for Diamondback. Diamondback was a driller with a market capitalization of about $27 billion before this deal was announced. They've now doubled their capitalization. Now, several years ago, Endeavor received a good offer to be acquired by Shell, Stevens said. Now, Endeavor had an off-and-on conversation with Pioneer Natural Resources, okay? He doesn't offer specifics as to why any of these companies, Exxon, Shell, Pioneer, any of these companies, why they didn't lead to a sale. ConocoPhillips. But Exxon decided to acquire Pioneer. So Endeavor was off the chart. So it looked like all the big boys were buying somebody else instead of Endeavor. But Diamondback was still left, and that's who we went with. In fact, oil people are always over-optimistic, so I think they might have sold out early, he said of the manager of Diamondback. But when we still have an interest, in the oil business. Now, the windfall from Endeavor's sale is poised to make Stevens and his family among the 100 richest people in the world. When asked how he planned to use the proceeds, this is telling. So please listen, dear listeners. When asked how he planned to use the proceeds, the billionaire was surprised by the question. His quote, I haven't really thought about it. That's a telling story, folks. And there's a moral to this story, okay? The guy's he's already worth $15 billion, okay? He drives an old car and flies on Southwest Airlines. He's going to get another $26 billion. That means this man's going to be worth $41 billion, one of the 100 richest people in the world. He can buy countries if he wants to, islands. He can buy people. He can buy anything he wants with $41 billion. How are you going to spend the money? Haven't really thought about it. And he's rather somber about the sale. But he wanted the company to continue. Why didn't he? Because you and I, dear listeners, have something in common with Audrey Stevens. Now, you may think to yourself, what could we possibly have in common with a guy worth $41 billion? Earlier on in the story, I let you know why Stevens was selling. He has prostate cancer, and he's getting weaker and weaker all the time. His son wasn't interested, and his daughter wanted to raise kids instead of running a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So it sounds like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree when it comes to his son and his daughter. In fact, I've said this many times. People say, why wouldn't that son just take it over? Because the passion of the father is not necessarily the passion of the son or daughter. The daughter enjoyed it too. But you know what? Good for her. Yeah, I know I could keep running this multi-billion-dollar company. Yeah, but I got kids to raise, and that's more important. And Dad respected that. In fact, Dad agreed with that. So let's go back to my original question. Why are you and I a whole lot like Stevens? Well, friends, he sold the company because he knew that his son didn't want to run it. His daughter didn't want to run it. And he wasn't going to be able to run it. Because if he's getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and he's 85, and he has cancer, he's probably looking down the hall at death. And he was looking out for his employees, the people that worked for him, the people that worked with him, the people that were responsible, in addition to him, for making Endeavor the company that it was. And why didn't he go with Shell or Exxon or ConocoPhillips or any of these other companies? He didn't say. He didn't give the specifics. But one of the biggest specifics he gave when he went with Diamondback is he said, you know what? My people are going to be able to work for Diamondback. They're going to continue to employ my people for as long as they need to be employed at good jobs, making good money. So he's setting the table for his exit, making sure that his daughter has enough, his son has enough, and of course, his employees, who are like family to him, have enough. The sale, the fact that he gets another $26 billion, the fact that he's now worth $41 billion, he hadn't really thought about what he's going to do with the money. Now, I can't get into the brain of Audrey Stevens. I can't tell you what he's thinking, but I suspect I know exactly what he's thinking. I'm now worth $41 billion. And I hear a knock at the door. And that's death saying, it's time to go. It doesn't matter if I have $41 billion, $141 billion, or $141 trillion. When death knocks, you've got to answer. And it doesn't matter how much money you have in the end. So Audrey Stevens, a billionaire that I have a lot of respect for, because it seems like he knows the importance of life. And he also is smart enough to understand that it's very finite. And he's taking care of the people that he loves before he goes. Well, that's it. We're done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Send me your email address. I always respond to my emails. I enjoy getting them. I get them every week. I love it. So thank you, dear listeners, for corresponding. Share the podcast with your friends. Tell everybody. Continue to share the love, and we'll grow the podcast, and we'll take it from there. Okay? That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.